Good morning. So really lovely this morning. A treat for me to catch up with someone who I've known for many years. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Gary Crotaz to join us this morning. Gary, thank you for your time.
Oh, delighted to be here.
So what I'm doing, I'm going to have an attempt to give a 60-second version of your kind of career, but I'm going to then pass over to you to just really put a bit more meat on the bones before we go into the questions, because I think it would be fair to say you've had one of the most impressive and diverse careers that I've ever come across. So you read medicine at Cambridge, you then did a PhD in respiratory medicine at Cambridge as well, and then ended up going into a career in consulting. And from that, with your strategy expertise, moved into retail, and you've done some really high profile jobs with Mothercare, Selfridges, etc. And now are basically a world-class speaker and a podcaster. So hugely successful, as I say, really diverse. But would you, for everyone listening who doesn't know too much about your background, would you give an overview of your career to date?
Well, I love how you put it together because it sounds like I planned it, but I didn't. Yeah, so as I say, delighted to be here. Today, I have an eclectic portfolio career, but I think of myself as a speaker and an executive coach and a podcaster, and sometimes I write. And I have a few other sort of bits and pieces that I do, but I feel I live a life in freedom, working with people that I love to spend time with, and sort of unlocking people's potential. I guess that's sort of the common theme. My own path. I mean, I always wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up, and that was my path till the age of 28. And my own unlock moment was a year before I finished my medical school and PhD, and I suddenly realized that actually I didn't want to be a doctor. And I didn't know what I did want to be, and I didn't know what path I would take. So that spun me into going and figuring out, well, what do you do if you've got a medical degree, if you've got a PhD in the lab, but that's not what you want to do with your career? And that's how I found consulting. And I was in management strategy consulting for 10 years before a fortuitous coffee took me to a career in retail. I'd never worked in retail before that time, before I took my first role at Mothercare, and I thought they'd fire me after about a month for not knowing anything about retail. But it kind of worked out. And it turned out that I started in retail in 2013, which was kind of the beginning of what we now look back at and call kind of the retail apocalypse. The high street was dying, the switch to digital was really, really tough. A lot of stores were closing, the customers were becoming less and less confident. And Mothercare was one of the first hit by that. So actually, over the following kind of decade, a lot of other retailers got pulled into that. And so what I'd learned, sort of struggling against the tide with other leaders at Mothercare, turned out to be rather useful to help other organizations too. And I came to a time in 2019, 2020 when I sort of felt like I'd done my time at the cutting edge of crisis hit retail. And I was burned out, but I didn't realize that until after I left those roles. And I had thought about coaching for a long, long time, but never got round to properly looking into it. And I decided when I left Selfridges in 2020 to go and do my formal training. So I trained in Henley, and then I started building the career I have now. And that's been just this extraordinary, I don't know whether I call it a third or fourth kind of career over the last few years. I've coached people around the world, coached people in all sorts of different contexts and roles. And I just love it. I love working with people who have great potential, and it's just about unlocking what's probably already within them and helping them to achieve their sort of maximum goals. How's that?
Really, very good, very comprehensive. And you talked about your unlock moment there as you kind of moved from medicine to a kind of a commercial career route instead. This isn't one of the questions that we discussed in advance, so I hope this is right. But do you think people can have more than one unlock moment in their lifetime or career, or is it typically just limited to one main?
No, often it's a handful, but not many. So the way I describe an unlock moment is it's a remarkable moment of clarity where you suddenly figure out something that helps you in the path ahead. It's a moment of knowing something you didn't know before. It's not necessarily a moment of taking action. So sometimes people will say, I remember the day I walked out from my job. And I will say, what was the day when you knew that was going to happen? And they will say, oh, that was 2 years before, when my boss in a meeting said he didn't really think I had potential. I knew then that I was always going to leave. It was just a question of when. The unlock moment is the moment of knowing. So my unlock moment was walking down the corridor, and like a bolt of lightning, this thought came into my head: you can leave if you want to. You have permission to leave.
You have a choice.
Yeah, you have a choice. Like, other people might not agree with that, and that's okay. And you might leave and it might go horribly wrong, and that's your call. So it wasn't I will leave. It wasn't I will leave to go and do X. It was just knowing that I have permission to leave. And so when I talk to people in coaching, when I talk to people when I'm doing keynotes, I say to them, what's a moment that maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years on, you still remember exactly where you were, who you were with, what you were thinking in that moment? And so often people will say, I know exactly what that is for me. And sometimes they'll say, somebody said to me, when I was 12 years old, my dad said he didn't think I was going to make anything of myself. And what that's meant for me is I've always been striving to prove him wrong. Somebody else said, I remember the day when I was in a meeting with the oncologist in my chemotherapy planning meeting when I had breast cancer at the age of 28. And she said, I knew then that I was strong enough to get through something like this, and then strong enough to do something big in the future. And she ended up founding a cancer charity, which has become really, really successful. So it's different things for different people. I think we also have like little unlocked moments of, I figured this bit out, I figured that bit out, I figured this bit out. But the big breakthrough moments that you think back and you think decades later, I remember exactly where I was, those are really a lens on our purpose. And for many leaders in mid-career where they're saying, I've been doing this thing for 20 years and I'm not quite sure that I just want to carry on doing that thing. Do I want to go to a different level? Do I want to be in a different organization? Do I want to start my own thing? Do I want to go from corporate to agency, whatever it is? It comes down to a question of, well, what do you want to do? Like what's your purpose in life? And one of the lenses to help you figure that out is to think about those breakthrough moments. My breakthrough moment at the end of medical school, I now figure out, because I've thought a lot about it, was I wanted freedom. I wanted to be in control of my career, almost regardless of how successful it was. I wanted to go, if I'm loving it, I want to keep going. If I'm not loving it, I could change. And actually, medicine is a pretty restrictive career by its nature, that a lot of people feel very stuck in it. And now I feel like I described earlier, I'm pursuing my career as a manifestation of my freedom. It does link back to, well, that was what my unlock moment was about. It was about finding freedom. So yeah, that's kind of the connection.
I need to be careful we go, or I don't take you too far off down a track, but I'm really fascinated by this. Is it typically a negative experience that then triggers what becomes the positive unlock moment? Some of the examples you've given just there would be sort of more of a negative feeling that then pushes people towards a very positive outcome.
Somebody else asked me that question just this week, actually, and I'd never thought about that. And now I am thinking about that. So I don't actually know the answer to your question. I think I can think of a lot of negative experiences that people have talked about on the podcast, but I don't, it's a very interesting question, which is very current for me right now. I don't feel like it needs to be.
Yes.
But often I think it is, that's what people think about.
I just wonder whether maybe we psychologically get to a point sometimes where we're then really driven to make a positive change as a result of something. Anyway, before we go down that, so you've written a very successful book called The Unlock Moment. And if people were to purchase and read the book, what would they expect to sort of gain from the book?
So my book, so I have a podcast called The Unlock Moment. I have a book in the works called The Unlock Moment, but I've written a book called The Idea Mindset, which is kind of foundation to The Unlock Moment. The idea mindset is like a self-coaching program in a book. I decided very early on in a probably very uncommercial way. I was like, how do I put myself out of a job by putting a lot of the stuff that can help people to figure out their path ahead into a book, so that if you don't have the money to pay for a coach, because coaches are expensive, you can set yourself on this own journey. And it was based on homework that I was setting my coaching clients. So the idea stands for identity, direction, engagement, authenticity. So figuring out who you are and where you're going for a future where you love what you do and you feel it connects with your values and purpose. And it's set into 6 chapters, and in each chapter is a series of exercises and to work through to help you to figure out the path ahead. So it will ask you, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Do you want to leave a legacy? Do you want to work with a lot of people, or you want to be an expert hermit living on your own? There's no right or wrong answers, but it just helps you find that clarity for yourself. And then it helps you put it into a plan and figure out the team you need around you to help you on that journey. And actually, critically, and we both know lots of marketing type people, how do you tell your story to other people? Because if you have pivoted and shifted, you need to take other people on that journey with you. And just because you see it in your own head, well, I now believe I'm an entrepreneur, and before I was a corporate leader, everybody else around you needs to see you in that way. And I had the same when I switched to being a coach. People were like, but you're a strategy director. I said, no, but I'm a coach. And I had to think about, well, what do I need to do? How do I need to show up differently so people feel like I'm a coach?
Well,
that's
that
a big
leads us
part of the
very
story.
neatly onto social media, because we spoke about this before, and I know that your TikTok blew up over the summer. So I think that would be really interesting, in terms of your kind of social media following. What would you say to anyone who's looking to grow their own personal brand?
That's a great question. The first thing I'd say is I'm talking to people all the time who are saying, I'm just getting going. Should I spend a lot of money on a website? Should I spend a lot of money promoting my content on all the paid promotions on social media? And I always say no. I always say no. It's not that it's not nice to have a website, and I have a website, but there are a lot of people out there who will charge people a lot of money for a website that's going to get 5 views a week. My website today, and I've been doing this for 5 years, probably gets 20 views a week, and they're probably not from people that are very interesting to have viewers. You need first to think about, what is your brand that you want to put out there, and at the beginning, put something out there, because it will always change and evolve over time. I see a lot of people who don't put anything out there because they think it's not perfect yet, and what you need to do is just go, what's a start? And talk to people around you. How do you see me? How would you describe what I do at my best? And put something out there. LinkedIn, I would say, is more important than a website. And then on the other social media platforms, it used to be the case that people would say, well, I've got to be on Facebook, and I've got to be on Twitter, and I've got to be on Instagram, and possibly I've got to be on TikTok, but I didn't really understand TikTok. I actually think now that people have to be much more selective. So I haven't posted actively on TikTok, on Twitter for years. I haven't posted actively on Instagram for years, or on Facebook actually, because I didn't have the time, and that's not where my audience is, and I'm not trying to generate business that way. So I really focus a lot on LinkedIn, where over the last couple of years I've gone from 2,000 followers to 5,000 followers. So it's not massive, but actually a high proportion of people that I might do coaching work with or speaking work with are on LinkedIn. And I've actually just recently started a LinkedIn newsletter, which I hadn't understood about before, but that's a really good platform. The first newsletter you post on LinkedIn gets sent out to all of your connections. So the first newsletter will get a lot of signups. And I started probably in February this year. It's a newsletter called The Unlocked Moment. And I think in the first week, I got about 800 signups. And I thought, well, that's more following than I've got for the podcast and other things I've been doing for years. So LinkedIn newsletters are a little gem in there that I hadn't thought about before. And then I actually got onto TikTok for the first time in January, just because I was interested in it. I'd heard about it's a different kind of algorithm. It's a broadcast algorithm rather than a talking to your followers algorithm. And I was doing some work with an organization and saying to them, I think TikTok would be interesting for you. And I thought, well, I can't really credibly say that unless I understand it myself. So I started posting. And on TikTok, the way it works is it pushes your content to 200 people. And then if those 200 people like and engage with and share and favorite your content, it goes, well, they like it. I'm going to send it out to more people that you don't know. So it's nothing to do with your followership.
Oh,
So
really?
my first posts from January through to September, through to the end of August, all got 200 views because they got a few likes, they got a few shares, but not enough to trigger TikTok going, this is interesting. And then I was sitting one day and I posted a little clip from the podcast. And the previous one had got 400 views. So it's the same kind of go out to a few people, not nice, but not that interesting. And then I posted and I refreshed it and it said 19,000 views after a minute. And I went, what? And I refreshed it again and it said 38,000 views. I refreshed it again and it said 70,000 views. And that post went to 380,000 people. And I had 50 followers. And so the next day I did a little piece to camera, and I've never really talked to my phone and done that kind of thing before. And I was like, I'm going to have a go because I didn't know anybody on TikTok, so I kind of can't go wrong. And that went to about 400,000 people. And over the course of September, in total, I reached 4.5 million people. I had just over 8 million views of my content. In that month, and this still blows my mind, my content was more popular than Gary Vaynerchuk, Tony Robbins, Stephen Bartlett, and a bunch of those kinds of people. I don't know why, but just the algorithm have thought I was flavor of the month. In September or now, less flavor of the month. And so it does go in peaks and troughs. So you need to not believe your own hype. But it has been fascinating to see that you think sometimes the social media platforms are all different versions of the same thing. They're very, very different. TikTok will broadcast you to people you don't know, typically of a younger age group, but actually I'm talking to people into their 50s, that the demographics tells me. LinkedIn, really powerful for professional connections.
Yeah.
In Instagram, Twitter, my personal view is if you haven't yet built a following, it's pretty hard in 2024 to build one from scratch. So I'm just sitting there going, it just doesn't feel like a great return on investment.
For you.
And then you have to think about, well, what does it give me? What is the outcome I'm trying to get? TikTok, I'm unlikely to pick up high value coaching clients from the kinds of people that I'm talking to, but that's not what I'm there for. I'm there because my mission is to broaden access to coaching. And that's a place that I can reach more people than on any other platform. And I think from a brand perspective, it's quite fun to say, wow, I had a month where I was more popular than Tony Robbins. It's a bit nuts, but it's a bit fun too.
It's completely nuts, but it's great. Good for you. How exciting. And so as part of all of the work that you do, you speak to lots of senior leaders, and I know through your podcast, on the unlock moment. So are there any common themes that you see as to kind of I guess either barriers to success or common themes that you see in these conversations?
I do. I'm working with a lot of people who I would say typically are between the ages of about 35 and 55, typically in that mid-career point where they have gained enough experience and skills and capability and track record and success that they have some choices, and they're not still sort of completely at the behest of their boss. But they have the energy to go, I'm thinking about my next chapter. And do I want this to be my next chapter? Do I want it to be evolved or grown or completely different? And I think that the really common theme that I like to talk a lot about is this escaping from the overwhelm. So I'm talking to so many people right now, and they say, I have this idea that I want it to be different from now because I don't really feel I'm fulfilled. I don't feel like I'm happy. I don't feel I'm at my best. But I start with, I don't even have time to think about that question because I'm working too long hours. I've got all these responsibilities. My work week seeps into my weekend.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm thinking about it and I can't figure out the answer. It's, I can't even start properly thinking about it, and I feel tired. I feel exhausted because this has been going on for a long time. A lot of people today are describing that it kind of started in 2020 with the pandemic, and there's not been a break yet. So I talk a lot to people about having to be much, much more intentional about the way they set boundaries to carve out the headspace and the clarity and the time and the energy to even start to figure out the path ahead. And somebody I worked with a year or two ago who was a hugely successful young senior leader, but he was working every day, 7 days a week. And he felt as his job got bigger that it was reasonable that it would also become bigger in terms of the time commitment. And I said to him, can you think of people with a job that's 10 times bigger than yours? And he went, well, yeah, I can, and like leaders of tech businesses and so on. And I said, and are they working many more hours than you are? And he went, no, probably not. And I said, so how'd they do that? And there's something about the people who have the biggest roles are incredibly disciplined about the way they set boundaries, the way they chunk up their time, the degree to which they protect the time that is not being pulled into everybody else's agenda, being reactive, being pulled into meetings, whatever. And they will generally have very proactive conversations with the people around them, their bosses, their teams, their peers. And they will say, let's have a conversation about what I need from you and what you need from me so we can be at our best. And it feels like quite an uncomfortable conversation to have that kind of conversation, but it's so incredibly powerful because what then happens is people start to let go of this idea that more is better, because normally it isn't. I'm working with a client at the moment where something that's quite striking about them is everybody's running around from meeting to meeting. And I'm sitting there going, well, I don't exactly know what you're all doing, but it can't all be equally important. So if we were to say what the three most important things this organization is doing, could we put it up on the wall? And then could we say, what of all the stuff that's happening is pointed at those things? And when you start to have that kind of conversation, you realize you can free up a lot of time. And in a couple of organizations I've worked for in the past, we've done that exercise for the most senior leaders. And I said, let's write down what you do with your time in a typical week. What meetings are you in? What conversations are you in? Which ones are the ones that only you can do? And which are the ones that somebody else could do that? You're just not delegating, you're just not letting go. And in both cases I've done that, we've freed up more than a day a week of each of the C-suite in that organization.
That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. And they thought, well, if I could free up an hour or two, that would be amazing. I was like, no, I think we'll probably release a day and a half of your time. And frankly, we need to, because to do the big stuff, to do the big thinking takes a day and a half a week, because no one else is doing it.
You need the
So
headspace, don't you, to be able to focus?
Exactly. So that is the start point for most people, is shift the balance so you don't feel anymore like you're constantly sprinting to catch up, you're constantly behind. And that's for thinking about your own path and career and development. And it's also to help you be more effective in the stuff that really matters in your role, which, by the way, also supports your own career and development.
I like that. I like that very much. And what do that leads on quite nicely in terms of what do you think might be the opportunities for some of these senior leaders that you're engaging with in the next few years? Are you seeing some good potential opportunities? You talked about freeing up time, but is there some other clever things?
Well, something that I'm seeing at the moment is we're living in a world that's more volatile and uncertain than ever before. And what's being valued, I think, more than ever before is cross-functional, cross-industry expertise. So it is valued more than ever before that your senior leaders bring a diversity of perspective, bring an external network that they can connect into organizations. And so I'm encouraging a lot of people to think about not necessarily doing a full-time portfolio career, but if you're in a role, should you be spending one day a week with your eyes outside of the organization. So maybe you've got a board position, or maybe you're doing some mentoring or coaching of up and coming leaders in a different environment, or maybe you're playing a role on your industry body, something like that. So, when I came into retail, for the previous 30 years, probably coming into retail with no background in retail just wouldn't have worked, because retail is a very complex thing, and kind of to succeed, you needed to understand the playbook of retail. From 2013 onwards, and this was my luck more than judgment, but the old playbook stopped working. And so people coming in from the outside who'd worked for online businesses, or worked for, fast changing private equity backed businesses, or, thought very customer centric in a way that retailers didn't necessarily do, that was incredibly valuable input. Today, I'm seeing it around different styles of leadership. So the old style of kind of top-down command and control leadership in most environments doesn't work in the same way, because your Gen Z junior workforce doesn't want to be led in that way. And so leaders who can say, well, in other environments, this is how they do it. Maybe I'll bring somebody in to speak, or we can build an advisory panel of people with a breadth of experience. That's a really, really powerful thing. So I think there's something about not necessarily freelance or interim, but what are the other strings to your bow that you can start to build, where you've got, like, you're like a T-shaped leader. You've got a deep vertical expertise in industry, in function, in specialism, maybe in a specific firm. And then you've got a breadth, which is knowing stuff, but as well as knowing stuff, critically being able to ask brilliant questions to which you don't know the answer, but neither does anybody else. So what is going to be the impact of AI on our business or on our industry? The answer is none of us know. Not over the 3-year, 5-year time horizon, but we better be talking about it, and we better be thinking about it and imagining what it could be. I see a lot of leaders who, again, back to the overwhelm, are going, I do need to be asking those questions, but I get to Friday and I'm still going through my email, frankly. Haven't got there yet. But that is a really big opportunity for leaders. If you can be that person who can be bringing new thinking to the table, particularly on a subject like AI, that's really powerful.
That's a good thing for people to think about, and it gives you real purpose. Then it's a much broader way of looking at your career, rather than just focusing internally on the role that you're doing. It's easier to say than action, I'm sure, but a really good tip. We talk a lot about positive mindset when we do these Q&As, and I'm a firm believer, having done many of these now, and I'm sure you will have seen it on your podcast as well. The successful senior leaders have a positive mindset, and they tend to have really good daily habits or rituals that they do in order to maintain that positive mindset. Is there anything that you do that you would be able to share that may be of value to others in that regard?
It's an interesting theme, and it's hard because inevitably there are moments where we haven't quite all got it together, and then the overwhelm can drag you back to a place not of necessarily feeling down, but just, I haven't quite got the balance that I need. I talked to a very senior US biotech executive that I've known for a long time, called Vicky Sato, on the podcast. And she's a non-exec director of Bristol Myers Squibb, and a senior director of one of the US's largest pharma companies. And she said a very interesting thing. She said, I hear a lot of people complaining to me that they don't have balance in their lives, but I don't hear many people saying that balance is an explicit objective of what they're trying to do. Their explicit objectives tend to be promotion or money or 3 holidays in Mystique or whatever it is. And then they find themselves overwhelmed in the pursuit of that. And I'm actually saying, balance number one. And within balance, I'd like to improve my Italian and learn the Argentine tango and work with some really bright young scientists, but always balance number one. The thing that I thought of when you asked that question was, there's 2 people I've had on the podcast, both world-leading coaches and senior leaders in the US, and they described their unlock moment as a little mantra that happened early in their career. And they said, I keep coming back to this. And I thought that's really helpful. So one was Ruth Gautian. She works at Weill Cornell in New York, so a big medical school. And she said, my mentor said to me, do something important, not just interesting. That was my unlock moment. And it pivoted me from running a small program within my university to thinking about how I could take it national. And she said, now every time I'm getting a bit drowned in the detail, I come back to do something important, not just interesting. And it helps me lift my eyes up and see the big picture. Carol Kaufman, who founded the Harvard Institute for Coaching, one of the US's top executive coaches, she said to me, I was walking to a meeting early in my career, and these 3 words came into my head. And she said, if it wasn't for these 3 words, we would not know each other. And I was like, that's powerful. And she said, the 3 words in my head were, don't hold back. And she said, that's been my mantra. Whenever I come to a pivot point in my career or my path, I go, don't hold back. And I go for the bolder option. And so I thought, that's really interesting. That's not been my path, but to hear from those people that there's this little phrase that they use in their head and they come back to that helps them get back into that positive mindset. I thought that's
Like a
interesting to
prompt
share.
then, isn't it, that takes them into that way of thinking.
Yeah.
Fascinating, thank you. So for anybody wanting to learn more about the Unlock Moment podcast, how do they access that?
So the Unlock Moment podcast is on all the major podcast platforms, but most people access it on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. There's a website called theunlockmoment.com that also has a link to the podcast. And then actually the LinkedIn newsletter is a really nice place. So that's linked at the top of my LinkedIn profile. And, you know, we've got, as I say, 800, 900 subscribers of that so far. And we feature both, you know, new and historic episodes of the podcast and talk about various sort of personal development and career development things in there too. So you can get that in your inbox. It comes out every 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. So we don't spam your inbox with content.
Amazing. Gary, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Dr. Gary Crotaz, you know, absolute star, fascinating. We could talk for hours, but I'm really grateful for you to giving it up the time. Some super answers there, and very, very best of luck with all the things you pursue this coming year.
Thanks so much. Loved it. Loved being a part of it.
Absolute pleasure.